The Taniwha of Wellington Harbour by Moira, Wairama, illustrated by Bruce Potter. In ancient times in Aotearoa there was a beautiful lake in which there were two monstrous taniwha. Their names were Whataitai and Ngake. One day Ngake said to his friend, hoa, I'm bored. I want to leave this lake and journey into the great ocean. Will you come with me? Whataitai laughed. You must be porangi. There's no way to swim out of this lake. It's surrounded by land. And he laughed even harder. Ngake became angry. I'm not porangi, he snarled. I'm big and strong, and I will break through the land to the sea. Come with me. Whataitai stopped laughing. What if you kill yourself, Ngake? He hissed in fear. I would be alone. And once I have gone, you will be alone anyway, replied Ngake. Hoi, come with me. No, howled Whataitai. This is my home. The two taniwha began to argue loudly, and their tails slashed back and forth, creating gigantic waves that crashed upon the shores of the lake. Finally, with a cry of frustration, Whataitai turned his back on his friend and swam away. Snarling with annoyance, Ngake flicked his long tail and began to swim in great circles around the lake. Faster and faster he went until he had reached full speed, and suddenly he turned sharply and sped southwards. Parkour! Ngake's powerful body crashed into the land, shattering earth and rocks in all directions. Pieces of his flesh were ripped from his side, and his blood flowed into the water, turning it dark red. As the land crumbled about him, Ngake forced his way through the vast ocean, and although the salt water stung his wounds, it also stopped the bleeding. With a triumphant roar, he surged up out of the water and turned his head and looked back towards Whataitai. Then, with a joyous flick of his tail, he turned and he was gone. As Ngake's roar echoed around the hills, the sea surged through the jagged gap he had created, changing the lake into a harbour. Whataitai watched in shocked surprise as Tohora the whale, Ahi the dolphin, and Mango the shark, and many other sea creatures entered his home. He realised that Ngake's leaving had changed everything. I should have gone with him, moaned Whataitai. Maybe it's not too late. Gingerly he swam towards where Ngake had broken free, and the water was still red with his blood. Oh, way! I can't swim through that, he wailed in horror. And as the days passed, Whataitai's sorrow deepened. He tried to cheer himself up by swallowing an enormous meal of slippery eels, but it didn't help. He tried to sleep in the sun on Pitaone Beach, but since he was facing the gap where his friend had broken free, that only made him sadder. As he lay there, an astonishing idea crept into his mind. I'm as strong as Ngake. I can make my own way out into the ocean. Rolling himself into the water, Whataitai began to swim towards the small bay to the west of where Ngake had left. I'd better swim faster. He puffed as he approached the land, but at that very moment he felt his puku scraping on the bottom of the harbour. Whataitai did not understand that a harbour had tides, and since the tide was out, he was suddenly stuck. He tried to wriggle backwards, but the more he wriggled, the more he sank into the sandy floor of the harbour. I must break free, he thought desperately. Arching his back, and he threw back his head, but it was no good. I'm stuck, wailed Whataitai. Help me! But there was no one to hear his call. For many lonely centuries, Whataitai lay beneath the waves, imprisoned in his sandy seabed, feeding on any fish that swam close enough for him to snap up. When the famous Maori explorer Kupe discovered the harbour, Whataitai tried to call to him, but Kupe heard nothing as he and his people sailed away across the loud, slapping waves. More lonely years passed, and Whataitai dreamed of Ngake returning, and one day his heart stirred with hope as a long shadow crossed the sea above him. But it was not Ngake. It was a fleet of waka carrying the Ngātara people into the harbour. "Please stay," Whataitai called from beneath the waves. Although the Ngātara people could not hear him, they did settle in the harbour, which they named Te Whanganui Atara, after their great ancestor. It was only when they were building their hilltop pa that they noticed the Taniwha trapped in the bay below them. "Help me," Whataitai called, but the people knew there was no way they could free a Taniwha. Instead they comforted him with their haunting melody of their flutes and their passionate waiata. Then, one still and cloudless day, Whataitai suddenly felt the sand around him shudder and shift. "What's happening?" he cried anxiously, as the sea swirled wildly and the harbour floor beneath him was thrust upwards by a giant earthquake. Lifted above the sea, Whataitai struggled without success to roll himself back into the water. His breath became laboured as exhaustion overcame him. "Ngake," he gasped, and lay still. From his beautiful body, a white bird flew up and alighted on a hilltop across the Ngātara pa. "Away!" cries of the spirit of Whataitai. His cry brought the Ngātara people rushing from their pa, just in time to see the spirit bird disappearing northwards towards the ancient homeland of Hawaii. As soon as it departed, a great wave carrying sand and rocks and driftwood crashed upon the Taniwha's body and buried it forever. The Ngātara people named that place Whataitai in his memory. Today, the harbour created by the Taniwhas is also called Wellington, a name given it by its Pākehā settlers. Many ships and boats sail in and out through the gap made by Ngake, and somewhere beneath the land on which now stands an airport, sports fields, shops and houses lie the bones of Whataitai. Maybe one day Ngake will return to Wellington Harbour to search for his friend. The end. The Taniwha of Wellington Harbour was written by Moira Wairama and illustrated by Bruce Potter.